This week, Kumar and Dana have read Daniel Clowes' latest, Monica, but they're still trying to figure it out. But that's a good thing, as the book is intentionally pretty obtuse and challenging. Stay tuned for their discussion of the book. We hope you'll spread the word about Deconstructing Comics. Tell your friends about us, share episodes on social media, and also send us suggestions for topics we could cover. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com.
This is Kumar.
This is Dana.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar in Melbourne. Dana's in Fredericton, if anybody knows where that is. Today we're here to talk about the new Daniel Clowes release, Monica, 7 years after Patience, which we previously talked about on this very program. My copy came in this week. I heard a lot of good things about it. I said, let's record on Saturday. I read it twice. It was not enough times. I needed to read it maybe 3 times or 4 times.
Easily.
So I think having read it twice, this episode might be a failure because I probably should have read it more. Maybe. I'm not sure.
No. It's all good.
We're going to spoil it a lot. But we might.
We are, okay.
We might spoil it incorrectly. I think, I might misinterpret things.
Yeah, I was even gonna say, do we want to consider not spoiling this book? Because I think, although we're here to deconstruct comics, my first time through, I would not. I don't think I think this is a book that it's one of those things that really benefits from not kind of knowing, because I agree. And maybe get into that later why, but why don't we continue on with your general overview?
Okay, just came out last month from Fantagraphics. My edition is actually the Jonathan Cape Penguin UK edition, because that's what I randomly get. If I order online from my Australian bookseller, I get a UK edition. You should have the Fantagraphics edition, I'm pretty sure. And
yes, I do.
Up there on the top corner or on the spine
yes,
as well.
It does.
Like yeah. I don't have
does
that.
It in all those places.
Okay, so the short nutshell summary of the story. It's about a woman named Monica, whose mother, named Penny, was a kind of flower child in the 60s, late 60s, and end up going through a string of guys, deadbeats, a lot of them, and Monica never knew who her real father was. And then Penny abandons Monica and leaves her with her parents, so Monica's grandparents. So Monica grows up with her grandparents, and the nutshell of the book is she tries to find out where her mother is and if her mother's still alive, and also who her father was. And she tries to piece it together. Now, there's all sorts of...
And it's a pretty cool journey.
Yes, there's all sorts of stuff going on. There's cults, all sorts of apocalyptic visions and stuff there. And it's told through 9 stories, some of which kind of, at first you're like, what does this have to do anything? There's kind of an EC War comic in there. There's kind of a EC Gothic comic in there that's like 9 pages about this kid that comes home to town and tries to find his dad. And town's been taken over by some sort of ancient cult of blue people. There's a comic about an artist who lived it up in the 60s and is thought to be dead but is still alive. And some of these you're like, oh, I can kind of see some connections. And also these stories are printed on a different colored paper. They're on like a yellowed kind of old comic book pages, as opposed to the stories told in the present, which are typically on white pages. But there's a few different shades of pages. We'll talk about that. But we learned that early on that when Monica was a teenager, she used to write stories.
Yeah.
And that's kind of okay, so now we start to put together that these comic booky things are stories that she's written.
I think it can be interpreted that way, although, yeah, it's never even really hinted at beyond she mentions like
That's
2 or 3 times in the narrative that she writes stories. But one thing, though, go back to that EC comic, the war comic style one, that is almost certainly not one of her stories because that's actually her reality.
Well, I have
Okay.
I have big questions about this. So we get 2 guys in a foxhole in Vietnam.
Johnny and Butch.
Johnny and Butch. Okay, so before we get to that, in the opening pages, when you open up the comic, you see the history of the planet Earth. You see the volcanic Earth. You see like single-celled organisms. Then you see lizards crawling out of the water. And it basically goes through the history of our planet. Like you get Neanderthals, you get the plague, you get the discovery of America, you get Hamlet, Civil War, World War I, Hitler, nuclear bomb, Little Richard, Sputnik, the assassination of JFK, which we just had the anniversary yesterday, and then ends with the history of the world ends with the Beverly Hillbillies. Then you turn the page.
And I think that is the most brilliant way to position your story.
Yes.
In time.
Yes, but also, so Penny starts hooking up. She becomes part of the women's lib movement, of course, because she's hanging out with all these people who are forward thinking. And one of the women says that the greatest invention of the 20th century is the pill.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, we've seen Sputnik and the nuclear bomb in this comic already, so I'm not sure quite how to place that statement or the bomb or the nuke. And then we learn, of course, that the pill didn't work because she gets pregnant anyway. So it's like, what is it? This is the tip of the iceberg anyway. So the thing I was getting to was, so then we turn the page and we get the table of contents, and then we get this story called Foxhole about these 2 guys in Vietnam in a foxhole. One is Butch and one is Johnny, as you said. Now, in the next story, we learn that Johnny is Penny's boyfriend who's away at war, and she is cheating on him with this artist named Krug, spelled Krug. Keep that in mind as well as we go further into the story. But she's sleeping with this guy, this artist, counterculture dude named Krug. At the end of the book, spoiler number 1, when she finds her mother, she finds out that the mother's been married to a guy named Butch and is living with Butch's kids. So are we to understand, is it possibly the same Butch? Is this just a coincidence that she's married a guy named Butch? That she was involved with Johnny and Butch? Or has Monica constructed this story of what it might have been like for her father, for Johnny, one of her mother's boyfriends, to have been in this foxhole with a guy that she also married? Or is it just a coincidence that they have the same name?
Okay, so I see. She's living with the brother and kids of her dead husband, who is Butch. Yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah, no, that was a connection I was confused about. That is one of the many, just one of the many very interesting connections throughout this book. Yeah, the Johnny and Butch thing. I think it is. But sorry, but your question there was, is this a construction of Monica what?
Because did she hear that her mother was living with a guy named Butch, and then she made up this story about Johnny and Butch together?
I see.
Or were they literally together, and then Penny ended up actually dating one guy and marrying the other guy? Or is it just coincidence that this 2 guys had the name Butch? is this even necessarily Johnny? Because Johnny in later stories has more like, his hair is a bit more reddish. It's not so blonde.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I thought it was definitely him because there are actually references about how he was ruined by the war and that sort of thing.
I agree. But how many Johnnies were in Vietnam?
Just the one, yeah.
I mean,
probably several, and Butch's too.
I mean, I never questioned this until this very second, the whole time. But now I'm like, wait a second, are we sure about this? So I want to add that this is probably closer to Clowes' earlier work, like Velvet Glove, which we talked about a lot about last time, being really, there's a lot of surreal stuff happening, and it's hard to figure out what the connections are. It's a little bit more solid than that, and I think that it's easier to draw the connections, but you're lured into them. There's a real temptation to use the name David Lynch when talking about this book and Velvet Glove, and David Boring, which is another one which had a lot of surreal elements. But I think I think in this case it's apt, because to me it's a bit like, for me, Velvet Glove is like Lost Highway, and this is like Mulholland Drive. Like, this is the refined version that, like, you can't help but be sucked into it. Lost Highway is just like, what is this? Yeah, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. And Mulholland Drive is like, what is this? But I can't stop watching it. Or Twin Peaks: The Return is like, I have no idea what's happening, but I'm hypnotized by it. Yeah. And I felt like this. So, okay, so we get this story about these two guys in the foxhole. One guy, Butch, has visions of an apocalyptic future. For some reason, he has the sense of a black cloud coming. And he says, in my dream, the cloud finally comes in, turning the sky all red. There's a terrible rain of fire and blood, and the world opens like a wound in the soil. Everything we ever loved or cared about is buried, ruined, gone forever. Okay, so you think, okay, maybe it's just, being in Vietnam. He's feeling that way. Sure. Okay. Turn the page. Now we get an in memoriam. It's not at the front of the book. It's after the first story. So that was like the cold open. There's a little hummingbird at the top of the in memoriam page I wanted to point out. It's in memoriam to Allison, Jimmy, Richard, and Gary. If you've listened to any interviews with Dan Clowes, you'll know who that is, but we don't. Let's imagine we don't know who it is. But just notice
I don't know who it is.
Okay. So just imagine but pay attention to that hummingbird. So now we get to the story about Penny's background. It seems like it's just a regular omniscient comic book about Penny. She's talking about her boyfriend Johnny, who is away at Vietnam, and how it would be a nightmare if he found out that she was sleeping with him. Krug assumes that Johnny is an anti-Semite. That's a little connection that will come up later on too, in some weird way. So anyway, then suddenly on page 3, we get a narrator who's telling us about Penny's life and says, before all this, Penny had been an art major, blah, blah. It's like, who's this narrator? We don't. The narrator disappears. Then we see that Penny goes to a party, makes some friends. By the way, anytime you want to interrupt and like...
Yeah, I just wanted to... when you say page 3, do you mean... It's numbered page 3?
It's page 8 of the comics. So it's page...
Yeah, okay,
2, yeah. We've kind of in this post-coital scene with Penny and Krug, and she starts putting her clothes back on. She gets her underwear. We're assuming she puts her underwear back on, and then he seems to be going down on her. But then in the next panel, it's this crazy out-of-nowhere panel of this... I don't know, looks like a doll or a toy or like a cartoon
Barbie doll
that says, hey, that tickles. And then the next panel is it's post-coital again. So was he going down on her? Why do we have this weird cartoon doll thing suddenly show up? Especially if this story, as we learn later, is narrated by Monica. Why is that? Maybe that's Monica's displacement of thinking about her mother having sex with...
Oh, sure, yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, but there's a parallel coming, because they go to this party, and after they leave the party, they, by chance, run into Johnny's parents. And Johnny's parents
right, when they leave the party,
and Johnny's parents are horrified that Penny is with some other guy.
Yeah.
And then Krug starts saying he's having some kind of drug visions, and he's like,
yeah,
the masses are rising, son against father, streets awash in blood, your blood. And then suddenly we get a panel that looks like the Yellow
Magical
Submarine
Mystery Tour. Yellow Submarine. Yep.
Where he looks like John Lennon, like a cartoon John Lennon. But is that supposed to be through the eyes of Johnny's parents? Why would they look at him that way? Or is this the way Monica looks at him? Don't know. Then suddenly we get a cut to the present. People in a cafe on cell phones, and we learn that the narrator has tried to Google Krug and not been able to find him.
And here, if I can interrupt here, here's one of the things that I really love about this book, and I just noticed this one just now. That painting in the cafe.
Yeah.
The bottom left of page 11.
Yeah.
It looks like a crack.
Yeah.
Or like yeah. Okay, so now go to page 90.
Okay. Oh, geez. Okay. I think I know what you're gonna...
Yep.
Yeah, right. Holy shit. Okay.
So in the chapter that is actually called Krug with 2 G's, and I'm sure that you're getting to that eventually.
Yeah.
This is this artist, and one of his things that he talks about when the story opens is how, like, I don't go out, like, I'm just in here, and he does all this weird meditation stuff or whatever, but he talks about how his visual is his visual palette or whatever, but like visual canon, that's the phrase he uses. So like this little apartment that he never leaves is his entire visual canon. Like the root beer stain on the wall is as much part of it as like his mother's smile or whatever. But there are all these visual motifs that keep kind of repeating throughout that story. And I just noticed while you were talking about that one panel in the cafe at the beginning, that painting in the cafe is the crack on the wall of Krug's house.
Never even noticed that. And she's talking about painting. She says a few of his paintings are still around, and I never even put that together. I was thinking I was thinking we were looking at a person on their phone Googling Krug in that panel.
Yeah.
We see a black and white drawing of Penny here, which we learn later is an actual photograph of her that she uses to try to find her later on. Then we get the scene where the ladies are talking about the pill and how it's going to change the world. Penny gets on the phone with her mother, and she's sent a letter. I'm assuming it's a letter to Johnny saying she's breaking up. Mm-hmm. And she says, I already sent that letter. I told you so I can do what I want with my life. Yes, so I don't wind up fucking miserable like you, so I can fuck whoever the fuck I want. Slams down the phone, turn the page. She's got a baby, and the pill hasn't worked, and she's not doing whatever she wants with her life. She's like, kind of got this kid. Then we get some testimony from some old man. We don't know who that is at this stage.
And we all, this is a kind of future flash forward.
Yep. And then we go through all the boyfriends. Her mom, one of them is really supportive and helps her mom set up a candle shop which she names after her daughter, calls it Monica's Candles. That place, okay, so then they move into another place. You just move from place to place. It's very itinerant. And there's this Polish family that's next door that tries to look after Monica. They seem to think that she's not being well looked after. Penny is very defensive about this and attacks them whenever they try to gift her anything. The candle store burns down. And then somehow, by chance, just from the restaurant Penny is working at, she reconnects with Johnny.
Yeah.
And then it seems like her and Johnny, they're not getting along that great, I guess. Well, very often a phrase that comes up a lot is Monica will say, "That was the happiest time of my life." And she'll say this again and again, or that was such a great time, or whatever, with a lot of these different boyfriends. So Johnny shows up, but things aren't so great with Penny and Johnny. Johnny's like, "You could quit your job." She says, "I'm never going to make myself vulnerable like that again. We're not even married." Then the next panel, she reveals to Monica that they're engaged. So they're going to go, I think they're walking to somewhere. Anyway, they're walking down the street, and she's accosted by a burned-out freak, as her words, that hands the little girl Monica is handed a yellow pamphlet for some kind of cult. And he says, would you like to go on a celestial journey? And Johnny and Penny are like, fuck off, man. And they scrumple the pamphlet up and throw it away. But Monica pulls it out of the garbage and says, that's my book.
Yeah.
This is an important little detail we'll come back to. So that night she had the dream. The night before the wedding, she has a dream that she's a flower. She's a sunflower with her face in the middle.
Yep.
Okay, and then her mom comes in and says, we're leaving. And she takes the girl, she takes Monica, puts her in the car, and starts driving away. And she starts telling her, quote, she was telling me a story I couldn't understand. And then we have a panel of Monica in the backseat with her toys, and the pamphlet, which is called The Opening, sitting on the seat next to her. And it says, the caption says, in my memory, the uncrumpled pamphlet was next to me on the back seat, but that always seemed weird. And then she's dropped off with her grandparents.
Yep.
And she says...
And he's gone.
Then she says, from that moment on, I lived a normal life, happy and safe from harm, but I never saw my mother again. None of those three things are true.
I was going to say.
So another question is, at what point in time is this being narrated from? Because is it after she met her mother and learned about Butch so she could tell the story about Butch in the war? Or is your theory correct that the story about Butch is completely factual anyway and that story wasn't made up by her, even though it's on the old yellow paper? I don't know.
So I think the tense shift happens on the second last page of the book.
Okay.
Where she goes back to an old family property and she's retrieving a pretty important object, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then what was it? So one panel, she's saying, luckily I had taken out the batteries before I buried it. Sorry, that's not really good because that's talking about something that would be in the past anyway. No, sorry. I think I missed. Anyway, it's like within the last handful of pages of the book, the narrative tense shifts to present tense.
Yes,
so it actually changes to that. Yeah. So anyway.
But there's moments throughout. Like there's one scene with the cult where one of the members has disappeared, and she says in the caption, she says one of the members disappeared. Where was she? Had she been murdered? But we know by the end of the story what happened to that woman. So why would she be asking that question at that time? She already knows the answer. And that happens frequently.
Well, would that be kind of maybe just a narrative device, where you're telling a story, right? You're just saying, "Ooh, what happened? We don't know."
Absolutely, right? I can't rule that out. Absolutely, that I could be reading too much into. I'll tell you what, man. On the second time I read this, the first time I read it, and I was like, the first half of it, I was like, what is this? And then it started to coalesce, especially around the cult stuff, and I was freaked out. I was scared by it. I was really worried about what was going to happen. Occult stuff always really scares me. And I was kind of like, whoa, this is really spooky, and I'm very unnerved by it. And then by the end, I was like, oh my God, this was amazing and weird, and I don't understand it. I read it again. The second time, I was looking for too many connections. I was like, I kept noting down how many times people talked about what kind of cars they didn't drive. There was a scene in the trench or in the foxhole where guys like, your dad's probably driving a Chevy. He's like, my dad drives Buicks. And later on, they're saying, oh, that's a Toyota or something. There's just, I was
it's so cool that you drive a Toyota. Yeah.
Yeah. Or that's so funny. Are you driving it ironically, when she's rich? And I was like, why is all this talk about cars? And I noticed one or two more. And I wrote 7 pages of handwritten notes.
That's full on
my second reading. And they're all nonsense. They're useless. I haven't looked at them yet. We've been talking for 25 minutes, and I'm like, none of this means anything. Why did I write down all the notes about the cars? Why didn't I notice the painting?
Yeah.
So yes, why did I say is she dead? Why did I note that down as if it was something significant when maybe it was just like she was just being a storyteller, which is what she is.
Well, I mean, to pull back the curtain a little bit, before we started recording, I asked you, are you sure you want to record tonight?
Yes.
Because I knew that, because you told me, like, what, you emailed me, like, was it Tuesday or Monday that you got the book?
Yeah.
So, and I had read it once over the course, like I just reading before bed. It took me probably about a week or so to read it, reading maybe like a chapter a night. But these are not short reads. It's not a thick book in terms of page number, but man, you're not going through the pages very quickly.
Every panel is really packed. And
there's so packed, so much happening.
He talked about
every panel.
In some interviews. He talked about how some of the like he would draw a page and he would leave a panel blank for like 3-4 years because he didn't know what to go in it until he was exactly, and then it hit him like lightning. He was like, "That's what needs to be on that panel," and then he would go in and fill that panel in, like in the middle of a page.
That's neat. Yeah,
so he's like waiting to find a way to maximize the conflicting information sometimes to put into this panel and the drawing and all that kind of stuff. So you can't, that whole story about her mom and all that stuff, there's like, especially later on when we hear about her story, there's like so much information, and then you've got the drawing. And like the second time through, there was stuff I didn't notice even in the drawings. Like when she goes to see her mother finally at the very end, I was like, she's like a hoarder, or the house is a complete mess. But I never noticed the first time through, like her table is covered in pill bottles. And there's a couple of panels on that. Why didn't I pick up on all this stuff that was really, obviously very thought through? So I was finding connections that maybe weren't there. And also I think a lot of times I'm like, oh, what did Clowes mean by putting that painting there and that painting there or whatever? But I think sometimes for him it's a subconscious process. Like he's like, oh, there's a connection. Okay, I'll just put that in there. And he's not he's not necessarily constructing meaning out of those connections. He's just interested in them visually, or the resonance, whatever emotional resonance he feels from it is just like, oh, this is a feeling I get from it. And maybe that's all. I think on my first reading, I was definitely getting those feelings from stuff. Yeah. Like when we get to this.
In a lot of ways, it's a book that you can definitely just feel your way through. And I think that's a very satisfying experience. But like you, I read it a second time and much more slowly, but at that second time, and this is a book like like a great movie that you go back and see a second or third time, and you're like, oh wow, like there's so much more here that I didn't even experience the first time.
Yeah,
and I think this is one of those books that you could read a second, third, fourth, and it's not that. It's not just like you're reading it again because it's your favorite book, but you're reading it again and it's almost like it's a completely different experience because you're picking out totally different things. You mentioned that people kept talking about cars. That weirdly didn't kind of register in my mind. I say weirdly because I'm kind of in the cars a little bit, but the thing that jumped out at me were all of the real world references. So this is a story that it's very, very explicitly set in something we're supposed to recognize as our reality right from that first page where you've got the history, right? But then he refers to like Marion Crane, the character from Psycho. That all of the what was it? I had to look everything up because I don't know any of this.
There was like a revolutionary SLA, that's right. And the woman, that woman who's a member of it, that she imagines her mother was like that woman whose name I can't remember. She was like on the run for 20 years or something. The newspaper mogul daughter. The Hearst, was it?
Hearst, Patty Hearst.
Kidnapping, she was involved in that,
and Sarah Jane Olsen was another one. I had, and anyway, so there's a lot of these kind of real world references, and it was happening so much, and it was so intentional. I was like, these have to be so, and I started looking them all up, and I kept all of the web pages open on my phone as I was, reading in bed and stuff. And there's definitely connections. There's thematic connections. Like one of them is Rosicrucianism, which was like a spiritual cultural movement from like 17th century, which kind of formed a basis for a lot of cults that rose up in the 20th century. I mean, and not just 20th century, but they influenced the golden. I always forget that. Temple of the Golden Order or whatever and stuff. Anyway, lots of different, a lot of different things. Golden Dawn, that was it. Yes. Anyway.
Yes, and there's a lot of there's certain stories like The Incident, which are packed with real like actors. Like he's used likenesses of like Yaphet Kotto as a cop in there, and like Richard Deacon is a doctor, and then William Conrad, this shows up as this character named Finley, who has some connection to the main character, who's Johnny, by the way. It's like a cop drama, but it's starring Johnny. And the very last chapter of the book, we see a panel of Monica sitting down, writing shorthand on paper, and on the TV behind her is that character / actor on TV.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
So it's like, okay, so she's watching this TV show and imagining William Conrad playing the role of Finley in this story, which she's made up about her almost stepdad being like this tough guy cop that rescues a kid, and then... Yeah.
That's where she's kind of fantasizing about who her real father was?
Yes.
Is that
it's on page 98. It's a very top of page 98. But then if you...
Yeah.
Go to the story called The Incident.
Yeah.
I'll try to find that page. Oh yeah, so it's page 52. You can see it's the same dude.
Yeah. So although this is where one of my pet peeves about Daniel Clowes' art comes in. I struggle to tell his characters apart. Like, he's weirdly, really superbly excellent at drawing people who are subtly different.
Yes.
But his art style is also just, I don't want to say inconsistent. Like I've read three of his books, just like Velvet Glove, Patience, and then this. And I always struggle with his characters.
I think I've heard him say he uses a cast. Like he has a cast of actors that he puts into his comics.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll have the same person from comic. And even in this next story, which is this gothic horror comic, there's one of these three dancers looks like...
Oh, yeah.
Monica a bit, or Penny. Or it looks like Penny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, okay. And also, it's about this kid named William who's looking at his father. We get to the father, and the father looks like an older Johnny. And another thing that happens in this story is this guy comes back to his hometown, and it seems kind of deserted. He gets back to his old house, and the house is in disrepair. And I think that's me. Yeah, it had fallen into disrepair. Now, when Monica finds Johnny, his house is, in the same word is used, disrepair. His house is run down and covered in grime and stuff. So it's almost like, okay, so are we supposed to assume this is a story written by Monica and she wrote it after finding Johnny, and so that parallel is in here? Or is it just a story that fits in thematically with the rest of the book about a person trying to find their parents, and then there's a cultist taken over town, and his father has become part of the cult, so he can't reconnect with his father. And then at the end of the story, he becomes a tree, which is a lot like her dream of becoming a flower. He's a face in a tree, in the middle of the tree, which is just like that thing that happened before. So I'm like, how do you read it and it's kind of creeping you out. Second time through you're reading it, you're like, wait, this is all kind of stuff that's happened elsewhere in the book, and it's freaking you out. And there's all these, she finds this god of this cult is living in this cave, and they're like this down this tunnel, which is a bit like the tunnel she has to go through for her cult initiation thing. And there's this weird creature at the end, which is like all the faces of these townsfolk like melted together into this one big blob. And they're kind of speaking to her.
Yeah, they're begging him to kill.
Speaking to him, to kill me. And then he says, the monsters and treaties served only to confound my psyche. How could such a malevolent desire, the same as I, one purified in the blood of Christ? I was like, what does any of that mean? I guess it means that he wants to kill it and it wants to kill itself, and he's baffled that they both want the same thing. But that's a bit like those voices, a massive dead voice is a bit like what happens on the very last page of the comic. As well,
well, the second last page, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Or third last page.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Because going back to one of our earlier points about how dense this book, like the actual inside covers are as important as anything else, any other page.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Even the front cover.
Yeah.
With Monica maybe in space. And she's besides trying to find her parents, another theme that comes up again and again is her being a chosen one. Or I think her therapist calls it like a princess complex or something like that.
Yeah, or she could also be a Polarian. What they call it, the Starseed Polarian. I had to look that one up. I didn't go to any of the links, but
very few Google hits for that as well. I was like, what is
and
this?
Did you notice that they all have the same wording? All of the if you search for Starseed Polarian on Google, there's probably like, I don't know, what, 25, 50, 100, I don't know, like not that many results, and they're all different websites. But the summary of them, it's all identical text.
Right.
It's really a fantastic supplemental experience.
Yeah. And this guy, William, once he burns up this monster, he goes into a coma, maybe for months, he says, which is also significant.
Yep.
And then he becomes the focal point of the focal center of all human existence when he becomes this tree, which is what Monica kind of believes she is at different stages.
Although I don't think that, I think that's something that comes up, and that she kind of, I felt she kind of grew out of it. Like, I think there was that, she was kind of moving towards that idea more and more, especially when she joined the cult looking for Penny. But I felt like when she left the cult, she kind of saw that as the sort of crap that it is, you know.
Yes. And then there's a scene where she becomes like a skeptic, where she's like debunking UFOs, but she's talking to herself. Like, she's walking down the beach and she's talking about UFOs to herself, talking about how they make no sense. But in other ways, like, every time she finds closure, like, as I said, she keeps saying, this was the happiest time for me or whatever. And then she'll find closure, like, she meets the head of the cult, and she's like, well, I met my father. She assumes he's her father. And she's like, well, I met my dad. I'm done. I have closure. And then she's like, well, actually, now I gotta go find my mom. And then she finds her mom. And she's like, well, now I have no closure. And I gotta go find my dad. And then she has to go do this and that. And it just, she never, and the therapist even says, well, I think you're happy now. And he's like, oh, but I think, the therapist says, I think there's still some points where you seem shaky around. She's like, yes, and I have to go do this thing.
And then later she's like, wonder what she was talking about. What points was she talking about?
So she keeps she's trying to, I mean, it's so blasé to say this book is about trying to create an identity for yourself, which is like what a lot of fiction is about, but it's not quite happening on that. That's literally what's happening. She's trying to find her parents. She's trying to find her purpose in the universe, which is maybe the center of the universe.
Or finding her place,
that kind of thing. But then she keeps maybe thwarting herself, or she thinks she's found the answers and then switches again.
I think I felt like along that line of thinking, and this is definitely a question I had as well, like, what is this book about, right? Kind of along those lines, I felt that, and again, I can't say what was author's intent, obviously, but my interpretation of that kind of a line that you're talking about of her that search for herself or finding herself, and the theme or the interpretation that I had of that was that it's this idea that no, there are no simple answers, right? We love to have simple answers. Mm-hmm. So I'm reminded of the example of like you'll get like a science news article or something will come out and be like recent studies show that coffee is good for you. It will prevent cancer and leads to reduced risk of heart, whatever. And then, a few years later or months later, there'll be another article about coffee and how coffee is really bad for you and how it increases the chances of cancer and heart attacks. And it's and a lot of people kind of look at this and say, look, science doesn't know anything. And of course, the reality is always that it's not simple. Mm-hmm. Like coffee can have all of those effects, depending on the context and the dosage and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what's your place in the universe? I felt that the answer that this book gives is not an answer. It's just like, it's complicated.
I think you've really hit on something, because I think at the end she's like, I know what the answer is. I got to quote. This is a spoiler. I got to dig up this radio and listen to my grandfather. That's the answer. And she doesn't hear her grandfather. She hears a million voices telling her what to do, and she does what they do. And then we get a conclusion, which is maybe not her finding her identity. It might be something else entirely.
Was it a million voices?
Well, a lot of voices.
I thought it was. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of voices, but then there is the final voice, which is like a high pitched, odd, old fashioned cadence. But you're right. She's hearing many voices, but then it does focus down into one, and.
Yeah, so was that the, she went looking for an easy answer, and there it was, which we'll talk about that maybe a little bit. I don't know. I don't want to spoil all this, but it's hard to talk about without spoiling it all. So we get the next story, which is about Monica. It's called Demonica. And it's when she was in university, just started university, but her grandmother dies. And her grandfather died a while earlier, and she's absolutely traumatized by this. She's grieving real bad.
Which is important. We remember that she grew up, like they were basically her parents.
Yes, she calls them Mama and Papa. Yeah. Her friends at university don't understand. Her boyfriend tries to be compassionate for a while, but can't really deal with it, and he gives up. He says, I can't do this anymore. So her uncle sends her to clean up their old cottage and, clean it up, get it ready to sell or whatever. She goes out there and discovers that she can hear the voice of her dead grandfather through a radio.
Yeah.
If she tunes it to the right station. And this freaks her out. She says... after this discovery, she realizes that's when it hit me, of all people, knew maybe the most important thing in the history of the world. So again, she's placed herself at the center. Her boyfriend decides he's got to be with her. He decides he's going to support her. He's changed his mind. She's like trying to get rid of him because she wants to talk to the radio and she doesn't want to expose the secret, which makes her the center of the universe, I guess.
Yep.
So, by the way, and then the radio asks questions of the boyfriend and says, the grandfather says, so who is this boy? And she says, I told you. And he says, you know what I mean, is he Jewish? And that made me think, wait a second, this is Monica's grandfather saying, is he Jewish? So now I'm thinking, did she overlay her grandfather's anti-Semitism onto Krug when she imagined Krug's story, or when she imagined Krug thought Johnny was anti-Semitic. I don't know. What's the connection? I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah, right. So Krug presumably is Jewish because he makes that comment of Johnny, when she at the beginning says this would be Johnny's worst nightmare, that I'm cheating on him.
He assumes it's because he's Jewish. He assumes
because you're sleeping with a Jew. And that grandfather's comment where he's saying, "Oh, your boyfriend, he's not Jewish, is he? Oh, you know what I mean? Is he Jewish?" This is funny. I interpreted that as the grandfather was Jewish, like Monica's family is Jewish, and they're like, you don't want to date someone who's not a Jew, right?
You know what? You're right, because at this stage we think Krug might be the father still at this point, because what happens is she's with Krug, then Penny is with Krug, Penny gets pregnant, and we never hear we never hear who the father is, although Monica says in the caption, I never saw my father, which is not true by the end of the book. It's another thing that's not true. But anyway, I guess we didn't see a boyfriend in between, so we were assuming it's Krug.
Yeah, but I actually think.
But she has an explosive fight with him about this, right?
Yes,
in the next panel,
right.
She explodes. Yeah. Monica explodes, so they're arguing about it.
Yeah, but I actually think your interpretation makes more sense because if Johnny actually were anti-Semitic and Monica's family was Jewish, that wouldn't make sense. So yeah, I think you're right that Monica's grandfather, or this voice through the radio anyway, is actually, he's not saying it like, is he Jewish, as in, if he's not Jewish, I don't like him. It is actually, yes, if he is Jewish, I don't like him. Yeah. I think that's right. I found there's quite a few parts, and I'm now beginning to wonder if this also is intentional, where the dialogue can be interpreted in totally opposite ways. Now, I think the more I think about it, the more I realize, like, I think my interpretation of that is he Jewish part, it just doesn't make sense. But there's another scene where this is later on. Monica's kind of older, and she's taking care of the Airbnb, and there's the golf assholes.
Yes, that line,
and
yes.
She says, "Who won?" And the guy responds, "Don't look at me." Yep. Now, did he say, "Don't look at me"? As in, he's an asshole and he doesn't want the caretaker to speak with him.
Yeah.
Or is he saying, "Don't look at me"?
He's saying, "Don't look at me," but the first time I read it, I didn't read the "who won" line, and I just saw the "don't look at me" line, and I absolutely was like, wow, this guy that's harsh.
He is an asshole.
Yeah. And then I went back, I was like, "Who won?" and "don't look at me," and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, there were definitely a few lines like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, anyways.
I just want to point out a line on page 41, which is when the radio first speaks to her, she says, "My brain snapped into a different mode, like the calm adrenaline clarity that comes when your car spins on the ice or you fall off a bridge." So I just want to bear that line in mind. I also want to bear in mind that there are 2 page 41s and no page 42. It goes 41, 41, 43. And
it does.
Was that deliberate? Did he skip 42 for a reason? I don't know. It drove me insane. It doesn't seem like the amount of care that went into this. It's hard to imagine. I don't know. What am I doing?
I think Daniel Clowes has confused you.
Yeah. He absolutely.
Coming up, hummingbirds, inappropriate laughs, an interruptible narrator, and more. But first, be sure to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Patrons donating $4 a month or more get access to hours of additional podcasts. Get all the info at patreon.com/deconcomics. Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange?
So the voice of her grandfather starts to fade over the next few months.
Right.
Until it's finally gone, and then finally she says, one day I asked him, she was still trying to speak to it, she's still speaking to it, hoping for an answer. One day I asked him for a sign, I had an important question I need to ask him, will you be okay without me? Next panel, just then a hummingbird flew past the window.
Yeah.
So this is our second hummingbird, but not our last.
At least our second, yeah.
And then she decides so she buries the radio near trees again, and the next panel says, not long after the house was bulldozed and Tommy sold the land to a developer. But the drawing in the panel is her car driving off a clear road into, like, off a hill, like off a bluff.
Yep.
And then we get a black panel that says, by the time I woke up from my coma, everything was gone. Now, I just want to point out there's no skid marks on the road or anything. It looks like, to me, like she drove off deliberately. Like she didn't skid. She's just like, I'm driving off this cliff. Her grief is like so full on that she can't handle it anymore.
Yep. I'd buy it.
I would say that because I really have a question about what happens at on the last panel of the book, or the last page. Like, what are we really looking at? Okay, then we get the incident, which is this weird 70s cop show, but this time starring Johnny, who was almost her stepdad, or her Penny's first boyfriend that was away in Vietnam. Now he's got, like, long, shaggy sideburns and a bit more reddish hair.
Johnny is the, like, not bounty hunter, but Johnny's the guy that goes and picks up the kid.
Yeah.
Is that what you're... Yeah, okay, yeah. I see what you mean about the cast of characters. Yeah.
But it's not... I mean, it's not just a cat. I mean, this is... I'm assuming... Oh, sorry, on my second read-through, I was like, okay, this is Monica making up a story about Johnny. And it stars people like Yaphet Kotto and William Conrad and Richard Deacon. And, oh, by the way, we never mentioned that there's a character, the mother of William in the Gothic story is named Avis. And that name comes up again later on. Somebody else has the name Avis. I just want to point that out. But she's long dead. Okay. We just see her gravestone. And when we get to it, if I remember it, we'll get to it. So this story, Johnny rescues this kid, who's always just called a kid, from a bunch of revolutionaries, right? Like hippies, which is a bit like maybe Johnny was about to rescue Monica from her hippie life with her mom, if they were to get married, if they had gotten married. But they get back to town, and the mom has gone to the hospital for some reason, and people are acting weird in town. Like as they leave, suddenly there's yelling in the street. The neighbors are fighting for some reason. It's like a Twilight Zone thing. The doctor at the hospital is really hostile to them, and it seems like there's chaos on the streets. It's not really explained why. He calls his friend Finley to try to explain. Finley says, he told me the whole story, but it got so complicated I couldn't really follow along, which is the same thing that she said about her mother's story as she was driving away with her to take her to her grandparents. And then he goes to, he talks to another guy who he knew at the hospital, and he was laughing like a clown at everything I said. People laugh inappropriately throughout this book. It happens all the time. People are laughing at the wrong times, and it's pointed out. And then they kind of, at the end, he drives away with the kid. Do they escape to who knows? And he said, maybe someday we get dragged into craziness like the rest of them, but for now we had each other, and that was everything, a goddamn gift, which is the familial connection that Monica has been looking for all along, happens in this story as well.
There's a lot of these things too make me think of another theme with the cults and the way that people behave, and something's going on that you can't see. This comes up again later with that idea of passing through the cone and being able to what's the phrase, to fully experience the vast universal workings beyond our deluded perceptions. Again, it's interesting themes of the universe is too complicated for us to understand, even when we're looking at it happen right in front of our eyes.
Yes, it's incomprehensible. That's a feeling I had a lot of times. Like, it defies analysis on some level, because he gives you some contradictory thing. By the way, I think both of the town in this story and the Gothic story are both Inglewood.
Oh, really? Okay, that would be a neat connection, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Am I misinterpreting that? The road is closed. They can't drive into town through the normal road, which is the thing that happens in the Gothic story as well, is he can't go, the road's been closed off by an avalanche, and he has to take a secret back route to his old house. I thought I saw that somewhere, but maybe, again, a thing that happened on my second reading was like, did I imagine certain stuff? Like, I wasn't sure if I had been forced into a kind of state of mind where I wasn't sure if I'd seen names before or not.
Rondo's Grill. Is that the same one in the Cult Town later? No, it's a different one.
I did look.
They might have mentioned Inglewood.
Oh, yeah, we made it North Inglewood by sundown on page 50. Yeah. So this
in that later story. But yeah, I didn't find Inglewood in the first story. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. And again,
even if it was just like a sign in the background or something.
Right. So again, this is a on yellowed comic book paper.
Yes.
Although it's kind of in between the previous story about Demonica, with the radios on kind of a middle cream paper. So maybe that's half imagined. I don't know. Is that what that's supposed to mean, or is it not supposed to mean anything?
I don't know, but I didn't notice it when I was reading it because my bedside lamp is a little bit dim. So yeah, I think it's not. I didn't really notice it until you had pointed it out. But yeah, it could be. But again, there's so many things that I don't know if it defies analysis, but it defies logic, and it's almost like this book is constantly teasing you and seducing you and saying, you know what you need to do? You need to draw connections between these things. And then you start to draw the connections, and what you find is just more confusion. You don't find resolution. You find that it defies understanding, and it's almost like the more you pull the knot apart, the tighter it is.
Yeah, I think maybe the correct reading is there are connections, not
connections.
Not that there is meaning in the connections. I'm not sure.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
So we get to the next story, which is we learn now several years later, 22 years at least, and Monica has started a candle business.
Yes, the chapter Success.
It's called Success. And it's called her business called Monica's Candles, which was also her mother's shop, which is called Monica's Candles, which I find it hard to believe. That shop was also successful, and I really wonder how much money you can make on a candle business.
Like
if you're not Gwyneth Paltrow, is it really? I don't know. It seems like a very surreal thing to be a billionaire at. But she's about to sell the business to some sort of Texas firm.
And she does kind of explain why she makes the money, because they bought her email list, basically. She says, which again, I think it doesn't disprove your point. It almost proves it, because that sort of seems ridiculous that the email list for this little boutique candle shop would be worth millions of dollars to some like I totally get the entrepreneurial idea of, like, if I grow a business from nothing to something, then that has value and I can sell it and I can make a lot of money. But millions of dollars, that's got to be more than a candle shop, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be a candle shop chain.
Empire, yeah. So they're doing some sort of thing for the website. She's doing an interview, and I love this. She's giving an interview, so we get her word balloons of what she's saying to the interviewers throughout, but it's overlaid with the caption of the story she's telling to us.
That's right, and they do that throughout this book, and I kind of love it, and it's a
one.
Nice.
You know what? There's a crazy one in the previous, the Demonica one, when the radio first speaks to her. You get a caption, but the caption is overlaid by the screaming of the radio. Like, it's over the story. It's like the craziest thing. It's like, wait a second, the story is supposed to be the primary
it interrupts her.
Yeah.
That's right. Like, so you get the caption, which is, as we know in comic book convention, this is the narrative, the omniscient narrator or whatever, or in this case, the very fallible narrator, perhaps. And then suddenly, it was just one of those. And
how can it interrupt the narrator? It's not
this is
within
in
the laws of the universe. It cannot happen.
As you said, when is this narrator telling the story?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, is it supposed to be right then? I don't know. Okay, so here we learn a bit about what happened. So she was in a coma after the accident, and the doctor tells her you skidded on a patch of black ice and landed in a snowbank. Without that cushion, you never would have survived. But the caption says, in my memory...
Let's go back to that page.
Yeah, in my memory, the accident had taken place on a warm, sunny fall afternoon, which we got. So we've seen her memory of it. Yeah. But the doctor's saying... it was black ice, which in the earlier panel, which I read, she was saying that's like the clarity of when you're skidding on black ice. But she didn't have that clarity if she skidded on black ice because she thought it was a summer day.
Well, we even have the panel where she's driving off the cliff and there's no blue
snow.
Skies and green grass.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what to believe here. Anyway, she had recovered from that. And then she became a PA to this former actress who was rich, and she, I guess, encouraged her to go off on her own, so she started her candle business. She became very rich. That distanced her from her old friends who weren't rich. There's just a lot of interesting stuff in this chapter, which we won't go into, about how your identity is formed and how it's affected by money, and how she wanted to talk to people who had the same issues with her without having to pretend that it was all about hard times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But she also feels like a phony compared to her old self. There's an interesting panel here where she has a dream. She says so she sells her business. She says, about a month into my retirement, I had a troubling dream. I was looking for myself, but all I could find were slightly distorted replicas, each a little off in some barely perceptible way. And we see all these replicas, and they're all radically different. They're not. Yep. It's not slightly distorted or barely perceptible. It's very perceptible.
Yeah.
What to make of this? One of them even looks like it might be male. I don't know.
Yeah.
What we're. And then we get a panel at the bottom of the page of a whale that's being attacked
Moby
by...
Dick looks like.
Okay, yeah, or maybe it's got covered in stuff. Yeah, and it says things got pretty terrible after that. Daily panic attacks, unpredictable sobbing jags, total isolation. What's the whale there for?
Oh, is that the book that she's reading from in the next panel? Because it's a quote. Imagine yourself as a decomposing corpse, first bloated by maggots and mold, then a swarm of flies, then melting into the soil. No, that doesn't make sense if you're melting into the soil, because this whale is floating in the sea. Then she says
the soil is fertilized, roots form, branches sprout, reaching for what to whom, which is much like the tree and the sunflower.
Yeah. I haven't got any interpretation for that Moby Dick panel.
Yeah.
Although there is another time when we'll come to it. Ike, one character that she meets later on, is reading to her from Seawolf.
Okay.
And they don't. Again, that was another thing. Like, it just has the quote, and I googled the quote, and I found it from this. Was it Jack London or?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
There's a lot of reading aloud. Like, she reads aloud to her grandfather on the radio in this book. Like, it happens again and again, which is not a very 2023 kind of thing, I imagine. But anyway.
Yeah.
So she tracks down Johnny, who's now old and living in the disrepaired house, as I mentioned before. And she says she's been trying to track down her mother. Johnny is. She says he seems a bit off. There was definitely something off. Maybe because he's a PTSD from the war, which is what he thinks Penny apparently accused her of. And his house is full of insane self-published conspiracy tracts, she mentions.
Yep.
But then she said he had a few theories, but nothing made much sense. And she says, so I remember she had a pamphlet called The Opening. Does that mean anything to you? Now, we know from that earlier story that she did not have the pamphlet. Monica had the pamphlet. Monica picked it out of the garbage and kept it for herself. We learn later on that she's looking at it, but why does she say she had a pamphlet? And why does she connect that to her mother when she's the one that had it? It's very weird, but this leads her to the chain, because now Johnny freaks out, and he's like she was part of a cult. And we get a panel at the bottom of the page of her in the mirror. We've had 3 panels of her looking in the mirror in the story. Yeah. The first one, she clears her eyes and it looks cool. The second one, she clears her mouth, looks a bit weird. Here we get a panel which we've never seen from Dan Clowes before, with these kind of vertical lines to make it look really dark, and her eyes are just like black pits. And it's a really horrifying looking thing, where she says, next thing I knew, I was deep in the bowels of a dangerous cult, alone and terrified for my life, which again contrasts her being safe and sound. She claimed she was safe and sound for the rest of her life or whatever, which was not true. But whenever, we don't know when that was.
Now, we want to get through this book eventually, but I don't want to gloss over this one little point, because right after, she brings up that pamphlet to Johnny, and Johnny's like, oh, I'm really afraid. And then the narration continues. He began an intricate rant, secret societies, the Crusades, the incident.
Yes, I noted that too.
I was like, what
is the incident?
I thought this was one of Monica's stories.
Did he say the incident, and then she wrote a story called The Incident afterwards?
But he doesn't say the incident.
Oh,
the narrator says the narration, which is Monica ostensibly.
Yeah, but he must have said it so that she says he became he must have talked about secret societies and crusades and the incident. Oh, yeah, no, you're right. No, you're right. You're right.
She's saying that he talked about it, but...
He talked about the incident. Oh, my God. Okay, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it really doesn't, but it's a connection.
It is a connection, yes.
Yeah, anyways, yeah. So that was her meeting Johnny, and the tale of her success,
Yes.
And so then she joins the cult.
Yeah, she quits the job. She decides to go undercover in the cult, which had split up into 2 factions, one called The Opening, one called The Way. Because of what Johnny said, she thinks her mom might be in the Opening. She kind of investigates. She finds a reporter that had written an article. That goes nowhere. She meets some people that go to the old cafe that the cult used to frequent. That goes nowhere. Finally, she meets the old man that gave her the pamphlet back in the 60s. He approaches her, and his daughter and wife left to join the Way side of it. And he wants his daughter Alice, he wants her to tell her if she finds him to say that her father still loves her. And he also gives her a thing in a paper bag, which is the Second Gospel, which is a document written by the founder of the cult when he has a Philip K. Dick-like exegesis. And we're told at that point that in 1971, V is the leader of the cult, the founder, was struck by a series of revelatory visions, like PKD, and went into the conclusion to write a vast, multi-volume Second Gospel. Now, Monica's been given the Second Gospel in a paper bag.
Yeah.
How? What does this mean? How can that make sense? It's multi-volume. Anyway, it was taken from Ava's storage, so she studies it enough that she goes to this town where she knows that the cult is set up. She meets a nice guy named Ike who tells her where it is, and she goes to this compound, which is supposedly set up by a trust to pay all the bills, or I might just be making that up, Ike said, contrary to popular belief. I don't know everything. What does that line mean? Does that mean he heard it and he's not sure, or does he literally mean he's making it up? I don't know. Why would he make it? I don't know. Anyway, she's captured by the cult. She's taken in. They interrogate her to make sure she's really there to join the cult. And they laugh at inappropriate times, like everybody else in the book. And then she slowly becomes indoctrinated and believes that she is a chosen one. And this cult believes that there are these aliens. Or no, sorry, there are ancient race, not aliens, that select people are visited by a deity called Lux. Are they the ancient race? Who grants...
Well, no, there's not an ancient race. It's that certain individuals are blessed with extra knowledge or whatever. What do they call them? Not paragons, but something like that. Aurora, yeah.
She says the foundation of V's gospel is the primal exchange, which posits that an ancient race controls all human destiny. So these people offer people wealth, power, beauty, fame, but they have to forget it. That's part of the deal. But then they control humanity, I guess. But V, the founder, refused the offer.
Yeah.
So he's like the one that sees the way, and he has, and according to the cult, we will thrive through the purity of our souls and our willingness to face oblivion and chaos. Okay, so she goes further to the cult. One woman is left. She thinks she's hoping to find Penny. Penny isn't there. Penny never shows up. Then finally, because she's the chosen one, they take her to this final ritual, which is Crazy Town, and then she meets the founder, and the founder is like, "You're a phony, get out." And seems like they might be killing her, they're going to kill her or something. But one woman who knows that Penny was Monica's mother decides to let her escape.
And isn't this the woman? Oh, this is the woman that left the cult and then came back.
Yeah,
so, yeah, right.
So she left and came back, and she gives her when she leaves, she hands her a piece of paper, which is a torn envelope. And on the envelope it says, "Someone had written Mary Russell, my grandparents' first names, Sand Valley, Texas. The letter itself was in a distinct cursive I immediately recognized as my mother's. I could only read fragments, but it was an angry rebuttal to some accusation of betrayal. She was disillusioned with V, saw him as a fraud, and alluded to her own higher aspirations. No mention of me, of course." So my question is,
letter.
Did Penny send this letter? Did she escape to her parents and then send the letter back to the cult? Or what is it? Why does it have the address of her grandparents on it? I couldn't...
Or it has their names, yeah.
Yeah, it has their first name. Maybe that's not the address. And it was written in a different hand than the letter, it seems to be, which was immediately recognized as her mother's cursive.
Yeah.
Wow, really, I wanted to know what... We don't get a clear shot of it. We don't know what it is. It's very baffling to me where it was sent, who had it, why did that woman have it. Okay, so Ike, she starts living with Ike again. She says this is the best family I'd had in my life. Ike and his daughter or sister or wife, I can't remember.
Daughter.
Yeah. So she's living with them for a while, and then she's like, "Wow, great, I have closure. I found out who my dad is. I met him." And then she decides, no, I don't. The last panel, she drives off in a different direction.
Yeah.
And we don't know where she's going quite. Oh, she's going to Sand Valley, Texas, to the address that was on the envelope of the letter. I guess it was sent from there. Then we get to our next story, which is Krug, Krugg, 2 Gs.
Yeah.
So it was only 1 G in the earlier story. Don't know why. I have a feeling that maybe if this is a story, this is on yellow paper. If this is a story by... No. Okay, we'll go through it. So he says, "I haven't gone missing. I'm still here. I live in my house. I'm still doing art or whatever." And we get this. This is very much a Dan Clowes character, a kind of loner who's kind of obsessed.
Right,
and he's like living it up, or he loves the old days and has very passionate ideas about things. Then we learn that a woman comes into the paint shop where he has a little gallery at the back and wants to buy one of his pieces. That is Monica. Who thinks that he might be her father, but we only see her in silhouette in this story for some reason. And she
and how
thinks...
about that panel? Oh, sorry. I'll finish your thought.
Well, I was going to say, she thinks he might be her father, and he wants to know if she has money. She doesn't have any money. So he says, "Get lost," basically. "You're trying to scam me," or something. I don't remember exactly. Anyway, say what you're going to say.
Well, I don't know that he does say that.
Right.
Because he says... So because this is one of Monica's stories, maybe, if I can just call it that, the narrator of this chapter is actually Krug.
Yes.
So all of the narration is
right.
Krug. And so on this panel on page 91, there, just as they're hugging, he says, so before I delivered the bad news... that I'd been vasectomized at a young age by a zealous reform school warden, I inquired about her financial status, right? And then, as you said, he goes on to tell her that, I'm not your dad. But
he does say it is indeed...
In the panel, as they're hugging, he says, "Yes, Jesus. It is I, your dear old padre."
Jesus, you're right.
So
which is
like the character in the story is contradicting himself in the narration. Yeah. It's like that was a thing where it's just like, okay, I am reading a Daniel Clowes book.
Yeah, and he also says the panel above that, he says she was a homely creature, but she said in the success story, I'm a beautiful woman. Other women would kill to be
interpreted that as sarcasm. I not sarcasm, but that she was speaking ironically there.
I don't know. She says other women would wish they would be as beautiful as I am at my age. But then when she meets a reporter, she's a reporter, she's like, I thought he might have a crush on me. I was flattered that he liked this old hag. So, I don't know.
Yeah. It's really, and I think that she is often, she like just the way she's drawn and stuff. Like sometimes she's drawn to look really beautiful, and other times she's drawn to look. And again, I don't know how much of that is just Clowes' style, but I feel like there's a bit of variation there that kind of goes along with that. But yeah, that line you're referring to where she says something about how, what was it? How beautiful she is. I thought that was her being a little bit cheeky, not cheeky, but a little bit facetious to comedic effect or whatever.
So the Krug story basically ends with this apocalyptic-looking panel of him, like completely red or yellow, with no shirt on at his easel. And that's kind of the end of it. Now we get to the
some kind of pattern on his forehead.
Yeah, it's I guess bits of hair, but it looks like lightning, like the lightning that opened the book with the volcanic earth.
It's again. It also looks like that crack pattern on the wall a little bit, but or it could be roots of a tree. There's all kinds of things it could be, right? Yeah. So again, I think we're kind of getting a lot of stuff here in this book that's. You made that comment earlier about how some of Clowes' process is just sort of going by the feel of it, and I think that a lot of stuff that's in here, it's not meant to be maybe scrutinized too closely. It's meant to more create a feeling or an atmosphere or I guess a feeling is really all that I meant there.
So we get last story, Doomsday, where Monica settled down, which she said she was going to do. She's just going to settle down in some quiet town, which she does.
Yeah.
And she says, another 10 years passed, and I found myself at last in a state of near contentment. Again. Living sexless and invisible in the blissfully irrelevant vacation town of Pine River, California. And then a man says to her, who are you talking to, girl? Myself, who else would listen? So that was a caption. Now, this is not the first time this happened, because there's a scene earlier with the radio where the caption says, was it all a dream? And the radio replies, you wish, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like the radio responds, no, sorry, the radio says, to what she was thinking in her head. So now maybe she speaks out loud. Okay, so she kind of sets up, she's making candles, she's selling them at the local market. She's going through therapy, and we learn here about her delusion, princess in disguise delusion. And we learn that she went on that off-road and she met her mother, and she kind of resolved that.
And
then she hooks up with this guy at the,
well, she meets the guy.
She's working at an Airbnb. She's managing it for these tech people who own it. And she's taken up writing again, we learn, which she hasn't done for a long time. And she meets this guy who looks a lot like Dan Clowes, but who has a very similar background to her in a lot of ways. They're reading the same books. They grew up in the same place, went to the same places. And he has some kind of messed up past where his mom left him. And there's some sort of dark event in his past that she's not sure about, some tragic thing. She doesn't really ask about it. But there's an interesting line here on page 100 where she says, I had long ago given up trying to explain my life to other people. They always seem to glaze over the intricacies of the narrative, but Stan was different. Well, as we mentioned many times, there's many times where she hears things from people and she's like, I didn't understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
So that's that kind of theme coming up again of just not being able to understand. So she starts kind of having feelings of romance for this guy. But then she has the encounter with her. She meets her. Oh, by the way, she mentions here, I started seeing this therapist after the first pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is somewhere in the near future, I guess.
Right.
After a second pandemic.
Huh. I didn't pick up on that. Yeah, that's a good catch.
Weird line.
Yeah.
So she finally meets. They've only been meeting over Zoom. They finally meet in person. Then she says, "There's something you haven't dealt with yet." So she goes on this long drive, meets her real dad, who is just no one we've met before. He was high a lot, and so Penny couldn't deal with him, and he threatened her when she wouldn't get an abortion. And after this, she doesn't feel anything. Like, Monica doesn't feel anything. This is where we get the Marion Crane line, where she wishes she could feel something. Like, she wishes she'd be murdered, so she could at least feel something. And on a whim, on an impulse, she decides to drive to the old cottage where she had talked to the radio.
Yeah. It's been developed into a apartment building or something.
We think was a coma dream, because we think she had her accident in winter. We think it was a hallucination. We're not sure, but she goes out there and she goes to the old cypress tree and she digs up the radio. She tries to speak to it. As we mentioned before, it's not her grandfather speaking, it's other voices speaking. They tell her to go out to these 3 trees, which reminded me of the 3 women in the cult in the goth story that were dancing on the beach. Was I supposed to draw the connection? I don't know.
I think so.
She starts digging a hole. There's a strange egg-like surface with colorful geometric markings. And what we see there doesn't have any geometric markings on it.
No, it's just like...
It's just an egg...
plain.
Like egg white looking thing.
Yeah, almost bluish kind of.
Yeah. And then a new voice says, "Break through the shell." And she says, at this point, I can still reverse my actions. I can rebury the radio and backtrack home to my tiny, inconsequential life, live out my days in contented obscurity. So she knows maybe she shouldn't be doing what this voice tells her to do. Like, part of her knows that it's going to be bad.
Yep. And we're definitely in present tense narration now, too.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is I can't remember where exactly. And I think he actually does the transition in a pretty clever way, because he has that kind of there's a bit of stuff where she's talking about like the double past, or the past perfect, what was that? I think I mentioned that I had taken the batteries. Luckily, I had taken the batteries out before. Yeah. So there's some kind of at least in the English language, there's some ambiguous tenses. I mean, not ambiguous in terms of when they're talking about, but ambiguous in terms of when they are talking.
Because then she says, "It's still set on the right station, marked with a piece of tape. I can hear a sort of hollow sound." So it's all present at that point.
Yeah, and actually the panel right above that is "The more I think about it," or "The more I think it through," right in the center of that page. So it's already getting into present. But anyway, it's a really well done transition that when you're reading the book, you don't even realize that he's done this transition. Yeah. Until you realize that he's done it, and it's like, wow,
it's too scary now.
It's too late. Yes, exactly.
I'm scared now. Somehow I've been drawn into the present.
And that's it for this episode. No.
Yeah. Very scary. And then I don't know how much we want to. There's a last panel of the book is absolutely horrifying, or not the book, but last page of that story. And then we get a full page with Dan Clowes' signature at the bottom. But the cover, the top half of the page, is a red sky covered in black hummingbirds, actually swarming with hummingbirds. And she actually says,
there's
in the second to last panel, a swarm of hummingbirds appears in the sky. And we know what that means from the last 2 times we've seen hummingbirds. And it's real bad. And then you turn the page, and I won't spoil that, but if you've read Basil Wolverton's Bible comics, you can kind of guess what it's like. And it's, boy, it was a scary, weird ending, and I actually don't know if maybe...
Oh, there's a candle.
Oh, there is?
Just on the inside back cover.
Oh, yes.
In that 2-page spread at the end.
Yes.
Little candle on the ground. I didn't notice before.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
A bit weird.
Well, but candles are her thing, right? So...
Yep, that's right.
Her and her mother's thing, and so she was living a contented, obscure, inconsequential life, which is the opposite of what she'd been chasing. And then she decides to keep digging anyway, which would be the opposite of contented and obscure and inconsequential. Mm-hmm. So it seems like this final dig is to be the center of the universe again, which maybe she is based on what happens in the 2 pages following, or maybe like she seemingly drove herself off that cliff. Has something similar happened here that we're not privy to? It was it ended much like Twin Peaks: The Return. It was like, what's this finale? This is scary. I don't like it. It's upsetting me. Nothing is... It is a conclusion, but it's not tied up in a bow in any way.
It's not. No. And actually, my interpretation of it, I was so confused the first time. Not reading the book, I wasn't that confused. I was kind of like, yeah, what's going on? But the ending, the first time I was like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I just put it down and I was like, that was very unsatisfactory. Like, that did not end in a way that it's unconnected to the rest of the book. Now, after reading it a second time, however, it's much more connected than I realized. And as we've talked about over the last hour and 20 minutes or so, it's all about connections.
Yeah.
There are connections. You're not meant to understand them. But my framing of that ending was like, it's a punchline. It's it's almost like a punchline. It's almost like it's a joke.
Yeah.
And again, this is just my interpretation of the story, but like, this is a story about that talks about complication. Like, what's the answer? There's no simple answers. You think you're looking for the answer to a question, but you're actually not. All of the contradictions of all of the characters, especially Monica, and for me, the way that this concludes. Because to me, the inside back cover is kind of, as horrific as it is, it's cartoonishly horrific. Yes,
very much so.
And to me,
well, it's very much like the history of the world stopping with the Beverly Hillbillies. Like,
yes. A wonderful parallel. Nice catch there. So, yeah, it's like the joke of existence.
Yeah, so, or, trying to place yourself... And we know she's watching TV and putting those characters she sees on TV into that story. Assuming if we use that interpretation of it. So, like, the Beverly Hillbillies is something she'd be watching. She talks about watching TV a lot. At one point, she's living with a woman that's watching Hogan's Heroes, and it's like we just watch TV all day. And, like, there's a kind of junk culture kind of stuff in here, as well as, like, the asteroid wiping out the dinosaurs and all that stuff in the opening pages. And I feel like everything in between... is like, okay, here's the beginning of the world, and then we get a lot of talk about apocalypse. Various characters talking about the end of the world and the streets awash with blood. But it's really one person's life.
And, like, the incident is not clear, but it is apocalyptic in tone. And for sure,
Yeah, but it's like one person's life between the beginning of the world and, like, the end of the world. And that one person trying to... figure out what their lineage is and what their life means and why they aren't more important and trying to make themselves more important and trying to be satisfied with being an ordinary person and trying to accept the fact that your dad wasn't a cult leader. He was just a washed out drug addict.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff is in here in this very complicated, mixed up way. And maybe one person's life really is the world for any individual is encompassing yourself, in a sense. It's like that's the beginning and the end. All there. I did want to mention that the crazy thing, on my first read-through, when I was disappointed by the ending, the reason was because the last page is 8 panels, and the final panel is a tiny little corner. And it's like it's the most, according to the caption and according to what happens, it's the most consequential thing to possibly happening, and the drawing of her face is like nothing I've seen out of Clowes before. It kind of
and nothing like anything else on the page.
Resembles the mirror, that scary mirror panel we had at the end of Success.
Oh yeah.
A little bit, and it's not like anything on the page or in this whole story, which is very like small town arts and crafts market on the weekends kind of story for the most part. And, a nice romance with this elderly man, and it's all kind of sweet. And then so then we have this shift to she's digging up the radio and speaking to ghosts again, and all this stuff is happening. And we get this horrific skeletal-looking last panel, but it's just a tiny panel in the corner. I was like, why wasn't this a full-page splash or at least a half-page or a page turn or something like that? It was very weird to me. And then I was like, no, it has to be this. Somehow... I can't articulate quite why, but it has to be this little thing in the corner, and then we have to have the hummingbirds, and then we have to have this Basil Wolverton-looking thing, this 2-page spread to cap it off at the end. I felt like there was no other way. I felt like every panel in this book, there's no other way to do it. All the confusion has to be that way. Everything has to be looked at from these sides. These characters have to look similar. This has to be confusing. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it, not in the sense that it's a puzzle that fits together and makes sense, but in a sense that it's supposed to not make sense. I think it was thought through. This was 7 years in the making. Since he's been working on it
that
since
makes
Patience.
A lot of sense actually that it took that long. Because I get the sense, and not on the first reading, but again going back to my earlier comment of this is a book that is very rewarding and like a great movie. That maybe it was before we started recording. I was kind of comparing this to something that you go back to, and you get something else out of it, something different, something new, and it's those works that are maybe on the surface kind of haphazard and random and chaotic, but are actually very intentional and very crafted. And maybe a lot of what Clowes was doing was kind of just going with the flow and whatnot. But you mentioned about how he would have left a panel blank or something, and then I could see him very intentionally waiting and saying, I don't know what goes there yet, but I'm gonna know what goes there eventually. And then when he got it, he knew it, and he, there's a lot of things that are done so intentionally here.
But I often wonder, some things like when he named different characters had the name Avis, like William's mother was, and somebody else, I can't remember who was named Avis. I'm like, maybe he was like, oh wait, I used that name already. Oh, I'll just leave it in anyway. I feel like some stuff was a bit. Maybe like that. I mean, that's just a hunch. I have no idea, but I feel like wasn't.
And that's kind of how things are in nature, right? Like you'll have coincidences and connections, and some of them are meaningful and understandable, and you can sort of trace. Oh yeah, A, B, C, and others are just like spinning a coin and it coming up heads 50 times in a row.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we came down on Patience pretty lukewarm back in the day. I reread almost all of Clowes' books about 6 months ago for some reason. I just I'm going to reread. It's been a long time, and I pulled them down off the shelf. That was the one I didn't reread.
You did not reread Patience.
I didn't reread Patience because I
read it like a month ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and I think I liked it more.
Okay.
But I don't think it's as good.
Yeah, well, I listened to the episode we recorded about it, and I think we felt like it was like the science fiction stuff was in there, but didn't need to be in there. And it was kind of, we were having this kind of like, what is it all? Does what it adds up to significant? And if you were to say this is about finding your identity, I would say that sounds terrible. I don't want to read it. But actually having the war comics and horror comics and adventure comics and the cult stuff and all that in here. I mean, the cult thing is really interesting because she meets a woman at the cult who's absolutely out of her mind. She's like a woman child, I think she calls her. Like she's actually a kid, but she's a 50-year-old woman. She says, if my mother had brought me into this cult, I would be like her, but we would be closer than sisters. And I was like, wow, it's really that kind of brainwashing is really frightening.
Yes.
And it's frightening also that she wants to be a Monica's been trying to be part of a family so much she would consider it, kind of thinking about the idea of being a sister with this person, and how that would be a path that her life could have taken. All that kind of stuff is, so the cult stuff does have a purpose in here. Like, it's all about connection and trying to be the chosen one. All that kind of stuff it has more purpose than the science fiction elements did in Patience, I feel like. I feel like there was a bigger... And I also feel like I still don't understand it. Much like Twin Peaks: Return, I'm like, great. I'm so glad I didn't. Yeah. Like, that's where the feelings get in my chest are coming from, are from my being mesmerized by it and trying to find these connections that maybe aren't even there, or maybe are, or maybe Clowes is like you interpret it. Like, he probably has his own interpretations, and he's probably one of those creators that's like you, whatever the reader wants. I don't think there's any... I mean, I found some clues that were like, oh, this is very specifically contradicting this, but I don't know if that it matters that I couldn't draw those connections.
Exactly, yeah. And I think he's doing a lot there that's he's making some intentional connections, and some of them are meant to be maybe understandable. And I think maybe sometimes on one level, for example, the whole kind of finding herself story, like that's just that on the surface level, the Monica story. It's really quite satisfying if you stop just before that final panel. Or just before the final few pages, where it's like, you know what, she found a guy that like is a good guy, and like she is content finally, and she's not lying to herself anymore, and yeah, like it's okay, she's writing again, yeah, and that's a really wonderful arc. Yeah, that you can take from when she starts her story, when where she's kind of abandoned by her mother and that trauma and all that stuff, and we go through and we get the trauma of losing her grandmother, and then the weird kind of connection with her grandfather. But it's like, it's Daniel Clowes, it's supposed to be surreal, right? So that's fine. So that I think is a really satisfying story. And that's an absolutely great way to experience this book, but that's just
you won't. The last 2 pages are going to upend that completely anyway.
And I think that's kind of what happened to me the first time. It was just like, okay, there's this really nice story with really weird, incomprehensible interludes. Oh, that's her writing. Yeah, okay, yeah, and then it ends with, what was it called, Armageddon or Apocalypse Doomsday. Or whatever. Doomsday, that's what I like it.
The story's called Doomsday, and you'd start with that nice small town image. You're like, what? Yeah. Why is the story called Doomsday?
Yeah, read on. Read on, gentle reader.
Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts before we close this off? Intense experience.
If anyone is still listening, this is a strong recommendation from Fredericton here.
Yeah, same here. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that.
Monica by Daniel Clowes is published by Fantagraphics. Kumar is the co-host of the podcast Comic Book Movie Oblivion, about relatively obscure movies based on comics. If you're enjoying our comics discussion every week, consider supporting this podcast by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on what used to be Twitter, on Facebook, where we have both a page and a group, or on YouTube. Via our site, you can also shop on Amazon to support the show and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. That's also the address for submitting your own comics work for possible inclusion on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week, Emmett and I continue our look at Jack Kirby's return to Marvel in the 1970s as we look at Captain America and the Falcon, issues 195 to 197. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.